this graph. It shows the last 20 years of beer exports. The obvious analysis is how far Mexico has pulled away from everyone else. But if you look closely, you can see a massive spike right here. But what happened here? What caused this dramatic delta to be created between them and the rest of the world? To explain this, you have to look here at 2013. One of the most important moments in the history of beer happened here. A $20 billion takeover, a DOJ antitrust suit, and a settlement that set off a decade of radical growth, leading to Modelo Especial becoming the best-selling beer in the US, and Mexico more than doubling the next closest country in beer exports. But before all this went down, there were decades of foundation laying that happened to create this perfect moment in the cosmos for a new titan of beer to be born.
Modelo is on fire.
For more than a century, the US beer market has been all over the place. Imports came in, wars happened, imports stopped, imports started again, American breweries exploded in popularity, prohibition happened, imports stopped again, then started again, more wars happened, all while the American beer market kept growing. In 1933, Heineken was actually the first beer off the boat after Prohibition ended, becoming the first import to re-enter the American beer market. But the import market was just a blip on the radar for a while, making up less than 1% of the entire US beer market through the 1960s. The 1970s, though, saw an explosion of imports. The market share jumped to almost 3%, with Heineken becoming the #1 import in the country, which piqued the interest of one brewing company south of the border. They thought, if Heineken is seeing so much success in the US, why can't we? And that company was Grupo Modelo, the makers of Corona. Leadership looked at the market and decided the rapid expansion of the American beer market was where they wanted to set their sights. But first, they had to figure out how.
Greed is good.
The 1980s were a different time for consumers. A rise in disposable income was fueled by tax cuts, spending was glamorized in the media, and it helped create a consumer that wanted status and that craved that vacation lifestyle image. That was Corona's in. Young beer drinkers, many of whom were Cancun and Cabo spring break veterans, with the more glamorous image and the slightly higher price tag of the beer in the painted bottle, Corona had its target audience. Corona first introduced itself into the US market in 1981, seeing rapid growth within just a couple of years. From 1984 to 1987, their sales more than quadrupled, landing them in the #2 spot of top-selling imports in the US, right behind Heineken. The plan was working. However, in 1987, they saw a slump in sales due to a rival distribution company creating the rumor that Corona's golden colored beer was actually employee urine. It sounds unbelievable, but it's what happened. The distribution company even had to admit in court that they made up the rumor. Wild. By the 1990s, the urine rumor started to fade, and Corona introduced Corona Light to keep up with the popularity of light beer in the US. It was around this time they also launched their iconic TV commercials, engraving the image of a lime in a long neck bottle at the beach in the head of every American beer drinker, leading to Corona taking the top spot over Heineken in 1998 as the top-selling import in the US, a position they would hold over the next 20 years, carving out a name in the US that sits at the level of Coca-Cola. Seeing the early success Grupo was having in the US market, Anheuser-Busch decided to buy into Grupo Modelo in 1993. Then when InBev forcefully merged with Anheuser-Busch in 2008, which in itself needs its own video, that story has family fighting and a hostile corporate takeover, it's wild. Anyway, when that deal went through, the part of Grupo they owned transferred to the new company, AB InBev. And seeing their investment flourish, they looked around and thought, yeah, it's time we buy the whole company. So on June 29, 2012, AB InBev announced they would acquire the other 50% they didn't already own for $20 billion. But as soon as they did, the US Justice Department stepped in and said, nah, we aren't cool with this. You're about to own the majority of the American beer market, and we aren't fans of monopolies. Plus, we know your strategy. You're gonna raise the price for our consumers, and we don't wanna pay more for beer. We love our beer. AB InBev wasn't looking for any more legal drama around their name after the hostile takeover, so they decided to settle. They would sell the US rights, but would keep the global rights, which was still a huge deal for them, with Mexican beer making headway into countries around the world. It would still be a lucrative play for them in the long run. Now, Grupo had to find someone to buy the US rights, and they had a pretty good idea of who should buy it. So they looked towards a little shop called Constellation Brands, who stepped up with a $4.75 billion check in hand and closed the deal. Crazy enough, at the time, Constellation wasn't even in the beer brewing business. Before 2013, they had never even brewed a single bottle of beer. They'd grown their business in the wine and spirits sector, first by making it themselves, then later buying up other wineries and distilleries. Probably their most known brand is Spirits Marquee One, who makes Svedka vodka. Oh yeah, we all know Svedka. One of the biggest things that made Constellation the right fit was that they were already a distribution partner with Grupo Modelo. They had the foundation laid for importing and selling beer in the US. They just had to figure out how to brew it themselves, which was a crucial part of this deal. They wanted full control over brewing and bottling, not having to rely on AB InBev to do it. So when negotiating the deal, they worked in to buy Nava, which is one of the world's largest breweries. Once the deal was complete in 2013 though, Constellation had to have the plant running without any help from the AB InBev or Grupo Modelo side by June of 2016. At the same time, they were also planning rapid expansion for the brands now under their name, specifically one they knew had the potential to rise to the top, Modelo Especial. They just needed a new plan to take on the US market in a way Grupo had never done before. After seeing the rise of Corona and how they had sustained being the top US import through the 2000s, they didn't want to trample their own, but they did see another way to the top. Since 2001, there's been one king of beer in the US, one that had grown an incomprehensible lead over all other US beers, Bud Light. That was Modelo's target. They wanted to be an everyday beer, not a beer for only when you're eating Mexican food or sitting on the beach. Which brings us back to this graph, back to this spike. What exactly happened here? Well, this was the moment when the cosmos aligned for one of the greatest runs in beer history. Constellation's new shiny state-of-the-art fully automated factory was finished, and they were churning out exuberant amounts of beer. So that was when Modelo unleashed their full master plan, starting with one of the most baller moves possible.
Clock is brought to you by Modelo.
They knocked Bud Light out as the official sponsor of the UFC and signed a massive 8-figure deal with them instead. Then moving on to other sports, they became the official partners of the Las Vegas Raiders, LA Galaxy, Chicago White Sox, and the Golden State Warriors. To put it simply, they were going after the Buffalo Wild Wings audience, the sports-loving, beer-guzzling consumer. Another move they made that was simple but incredibly important, they started advertising in English for the first time in Modelo's history. Before this, the brand focused strictly on a Latin audience only. In the process of that, they even launched a brand new slogan, branding Modelo as being for those with a fighting spirit. They launched commercials showing off the everyday working man and woman with a bit of class from that gold wrapper. By 2018, they passed their very own Corona to become the top-selling imported beer in the US. One of their biggest successes was focusing on the country's biggest beer market, Los Angeles. They got their tap handle in every dive bar in the city and plastered the city with ads and sponsoring events all over, helping them to become the biggest name around. They dominated the LA market so hard, Modelo now outsells Bud Light, Miller Lite, and Coors Light combined there. And all of this helped them land the #2 spot of top-selling beer in the US with Bud Light in its headlights. And those headlights kept getting brighter and brighter, so much so that Bud Light started to get that deer in the headlights look. It was predicted that Modelo would pass Bud Light by 2030, but after some controversy surrounding the Bud Light brand, their sales dropped 25% week after week, propelling Modelo into the top spot in May of 2023, bringing in $333 million while Bud Light only sold $297 million. Within a decade of Constellation closing the deal for the Grupo rights, they officially knocked the king of beer off of its throne.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die.
Between Modelo's wild ride to Corona's steadfast sales to Pacifico starting to make a huge dent, everywhere you look is Mexican beer. It's on a ride of a lifetime and shows no sign of slowing down anytime soon.